Hello, and welcome again to Tai'Shar Wheel of Time podcast. I'm Sam.
I'm Will.
We are here again to discuss Winter's Heart. Getting into Winter's Heart. It's autumn here, but Winter's Heart.
We're on chapter 10.
Indeed. Yeah. So, Will, if you'd like to take us away.
Awesome. A plan succeeds. And pretty much for all of the chapters in this episode, most of them I put as skim.
You could probably put that for most of this book.
Yeah. I mean, there's one that I would say read. Another one I'd say is kind of a between skim and read, and we'll get to those. But this one's a skim. Elaine wakes up in her bedroom, and as you may recall, she last we saw her, she was
attacked.
Yeah, she had just realized she had drunk some fork root. So she's awake in her bedroom, surrounded by Avienda, Nynaeve, and Birgitte. And it turns out the attempt to kidnap or kill her didn't succeed, thanks to a guy named Doylan Mellar. He's a lieutenant soldier who Elaine and Birgitte decided needs to be raised to captain and put in charge of Elaine's personal guard.
And sort of everyone agrees he's a little awful, but also, he did save her, and
right.
And everyone's a terrible judge of character. So
right, and they're saying like, well, he clearly proved his true loyalty at this point. Mm-hmm. So shortly after this, Elaine remembers that she's got an appointment with to meet Egwene and Tai'Shar Riyadh, and Nynaeve tries to get her not to go at first, but eventually caves, decides to go with her to this meeting. And this raises a question for me. So we know that Tai'Shar Riyadh is dangerous, and that you don't feel well rested if you spend the whole time in there and never go to normal.
Probably not a lot of REM sleep happening.
Right, exactly. But does going there take a toll on physical wounds in the real world or cause problems for someone who's, say, been drugged with something like fork root? I don't know. It's never really specified, because it's interesting to me that
I know you can get a real world wound while you're in Tai'Shar Riyadh, but yeah, I guess it's like, you think about how your body heals when you're getting good sleep, and if you're not getting good sleep, I would think it just wouldn't heal very much.
Maybe
would be my kind of thought.
To me, it just seems like Tai'Shar Riyadh is actually a pretty good place for Elaine if she wants to still be part of the action while her body is recuperating. But maybe I'm underestimating how little rest she'd actually be getting.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, at the meeting with Egwene, the main thing is that Egwene communicates to Elaine and Nynaeve that the two of them will have to swear on the oath rod when they
and they're like, hold up though, are we sure?
Yeah.
And then Egwene says, yes, I'm the Emerlin.
Yeah.
Right. Spoiler of the next 2 minutes. Sorry.
No, that's basically what happens. Like, essentially they remind her like, hey, we pretty much discovered
shorten your life.
Yeah, that channelers can live for a really long time if they don't take an oath, and because of the kin are all much older.
Mm-hmm.
Egwene has had kind of a change of heart, and she explains this a little bit to them, that the three oaths are what lend credibility to the Aes Sedai. I kind of tend to agree with Egwene a little bit, even though
it's definitely their brand.
Right. Well, the whole business of not being able to lie and not being able to harm somebody unless they harm you first. Now, generally, it seems like a lot of people don't know that this is the case for Aes Sedai. Some people do, but a lot don't, or a lot don't believe it. Like the White Cloaks don't believe that, they can't harm people or can't lie, obviously.
Right.
But in theory, if you knew this protective force that's, working to try to help you, that they can't harm you and they can't lie, then yeah, I could see why that would kind of help their image.
Yeah, it's like that comes up a few times. They're like, all right, have some Aes Sedai stand up here and say this, because everyone will know if they say it that it's true.
Right, exactly. And so you can kind of understand her perspective on this.
She's like, when you retire, maybe you could take the oaths off, and then maybe you could still live. This is all sort of uncharted territory. You can see how maybe that'd be true if you remove the oaths. If you might still live somewhat longer, but probably not as long as the kin who have never sworn on the oath rod.
And she kind of talks a little bit about, in relationship to that, the way that she sees relationship with the tower and the kin kind of officially working from now on. But at the end of the conversation, they realize they're being eavesdropped on by at least two people. One of them they briefly see and says, looks like it could be Rand's mean uncle. The other one they don't see. We get a perspective shift to some unimportant members of the Black Aja.
Right. Yeah, that's like textbook this whole book is like so much of that, like, oh, something cool's happening, let's switch to a perspective on a character we don't really even know who it is hardly.
What's funny is both this one and the next character, I was like, okay, who is this
exactly? And
I looked it up, and they're nobody. I mean, like
they're like haven't been someone that we've forgotten about. They're just nobody.
Yeah. And anyway, but so it's a bunch of members of the Black Aja. They're all working from Gideon.
RJ, did you like get a bonus for hitting a chapter count? I don't know.
Yeah. Anyway, we find out there that the other person, like presumably the one we couldn't see, that was eavesdropping on the Supergirls, was one of these Black Aja members, and basically they just want to try to capture Nynaeve and or Elaine, and that's all that's going on there. Which I'm like, yeah, duh, we know.
Y'all have been trying to do that since the beginning of these books.
Yeah, pretty much capture or kill pretty much everybody, but especially the Supergirls.
I just it feels like the stakes are so low when it comes to the Black Aja.
Yeah,
like I know they're magic users, etc., yada yada, but man, it just it always feels like table stakes.
At least the Forsaken, you feel like they could match, our lead characters in power, but you don't really have that same kind of threat. And really at this point, they feel like a, season 2 kind of threat. And, we're on, season 5 or 6 is kind of basically the way it feels like, hey, we've progressed past them at this point. We get another perspective shift to a dark friend who is impersonating a noble near Camelin. There are some other dark friends around. They're talking about dark friend stuff and Forsaken some junk. And then a guy named David Hanlon walks in. Turns out this is the real name for the guy they think is Doylan Mellar.
The Thought Plickens.
And this is actually pretty interesting. We find out that indeed the whole attempt on Elaine's life was a ploy
setup
to get him promoted. And it worked.
Oh, yeah.
So that was the titular plan that succeeded. So moving on to chapter 11, Ideas of Importance. Ironically, despite that name, I recommend
there are no ideas that are important.
There is one important idea here, but so we start with a brief Rand perspective. He and Min step through a gateway into a storeroom in a palace, or in the palace at Camelin. Rand uses the Mask of Mirrors to make himself look like some homely servant man. Yeah. And they're looking for Nynaeve and Matt. They very quickly run into Mistress Harfor, who recognizes Min. And
she does not approve of this strange dude.
Right. She's she thinks he's pretty sus, as the kids say. So Min sends Rand, a.k.a. her servant Newly, with Mistress Harfor. Mistress Harfor says she knows where to find Nynaeve. She actually doesn't know who Matt is. I could actually see this moment being kind of funny if they wanted to. This is totally not in the book, but I was just thinking about if Min started talking about Newly as how ugly and simple-minded he is or something, and like saying, bless him, he's always getting himself into trouble.
Right.
But I appreciate him in spite of that, and have him, just looking like,
can't say anything about it.
Right. That would be a funny moment. Then we swap to Nynaeve, and we're dealing with her, teaching the sea folk and talking to Olivia, former Damani, whose potential in the power is enormous. And while not a lot is made over this, I think at one point it's said clearly that her potentially actually exceeds Nynaeve's.
Yeah, there's like a couple of those now.
That makes them like the most powerful channeler, female channeler basically in the world. Like if anyway, it's I don't know. I feel like it's just kind of like, oh, and there's somebody who's super powerful. I don't know. It gets brought up a few times, but not a ton is made over it. Nynaeve is having conversations, a lot of conversations in this part. They're not really all that important. And, if you're interested in the sea folk and to a lesser degree the kin, then this is all fun texture. It's not exactly boring. It's just not exactly important stuff. We're talking about Aes Sedai and meetings with the kin and all sorts of things. Then when Mistress Harfor approaches with some ugly dude that Nynaeve is wary of until he says that he's there to talk with her about women's circle business.
Nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
And so she's like, okay. So she has everybody else leave aside from Lan and this guy, and Rand removes the mask of mirrors. So here we're reminded of how slow the pace is in the latter half of the series, because this is when Nynaeve tells Rand that Egwene is now the Amyrlin seat.
Oh, man.
Which happened 2 books ago.
Ugh.
And it's also mentioned here, and this is a little more interesting because this is still the Nynaeve perspective, but she senses some tension between Lan and Rand, and she doesn't know why.
Right.
And it's not exactly spelled out. I think we're supposed to kind of pick up on the fact that it's over the last time these guys saw each other, which was like 4 books ago. Lan actually advised Rand to stay away from Elaine if he loved her, and said he was going to do the same with Nynaeve. And
Rand's like, well, obviously you didn't do that.
Yeah, basically. Now he shows up and they're married. So it's probably kind of like, I'm trying to do my thing over here.
Yeah. Well, and it's like doubling down on that. The fact that Lan picks up on Rand having some wacky plot that could potentially put Nynaeve in danger.
Right.
Because of course he does, because he's the Dragon Reborn.
This is, of course, where Rand asks Nynaeve for help and gives her the keys to both Chodon calls to explain that, and he explains that he wants the 2 of them to attempt to cleanse Sidene with both Chodon call access keys. He just mentions, but there's some men he has to kill first. It's just hold on to these.
Folks need some killing.
Of course, as you mentioned, Lan is like, well, he doesn't seem crazy about the idea, although it comes in the form of, why wouldn't they have done this in the Age of Legends if it could be done? And Rand's like, I don't know.
I should have.
Yeah.
I guess the takeaway is that the taint on the pattern is what ended the Age of Legends, like punctuation mark at the end of the Age of Legends. So they just never had a shot, really.
Really, yeah.
Yeah, like by the time, there were still all the Aes Sedai around, but half of them were going insane and destroying the world. So they were kind of occupied with other things.
Exactly, yeah. And on the timeline, they refer to that time as the time of madness. And so when all the men had to be hunted down and killed by the female Aes Sedai, it was probably pretty hectic. And at the time, I'm sure they lost a lot of the ter'angreal. They may not have even known where the access keys were for the Chodon call for a lot of that.
Yeah, so I think at one point the Forsaken say, so it's like they're all discussing and they're like, weren't all the keys destroyed?
Yeah.
One of them says that.
Actually, that's coming up here in a bit.
Fair enough.
No worries. So moving on to chapter 12, Illyrian Winter. This is the one that I say is a read, and you'll see why in a second. Because this is one of those, this chapter kind of chapter.
Lily of the Winter.
Like, this chapter.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You know which chapter now.
Right.
Yeah.
Now the name makes me feel a little icky.
You're right. Yep. Yeah, it does. So we start with Elaine, and she's going to see Rand with Avienda and Min. So I guess Min just went and found Elaine, and they had a chat, and now the 3 ladies are going to find him. So she's understandably huffy about the fact that Rand was fully planning on sneaking in and out without seeing her. So they arrive at Nynaeve's quarters. And after the three women confess their love for Rand, and Rand confesses his loves for the three
grudgingly
women,
he's like, I'm a terrible person.
Yeah. The four of them go back to Elaine's chambers, where they explain that the three women have made plans to bond Rand as warder. So it turns out Min doesn't actually need to be a channeler to be part of a bond, which does actually make sense, given that warders don't channel. Rand protests, but eventually agrees. I will say, I don't know, this is odd to me, that Rand so quickly caves.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I don't know.
I mean, like, to me, it would have made more sense if they had approached him with this, if he had said no outright, and then like later they had to track him down, and there was some like
I would say this dude has a track record of not saying no when pretty ladies ask him to do things.
That's true. That's fair. Elaine seems confounded to realize once the bond is placed that Rand really does love her, which, I don't know, feels very Twilight to me.
Oh, true.
And as apparently agreed upon earlier, Min and Aviendha leave Elaine and
Rand right here
alone for.
This is where I think the show is going to diverge from the book. I don't think they're going to leave.
Yeah, I'm afraid you're right. Oh man. So, and that's what makes me sad. It's like, okay, so we get a really funny perspective,
right?
So we switch to Min as she and Aviendha try to ignore the effects of the bond.
We are grateful for Jordan.
Yes,
doing this.
Yes, certainly. This is funny. This is supposed to be funny.
It is. Yeah.
It's clear that Min and Aviendha don't have much in common. That's the other.
Yeah, they like barely know each other,
right?
At all.
And so they're both like trying desperately to ignore what's going on in their head, while at the same time not really knowing how to make conversation with one another.
You like baseball?
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, to me, this has the potential of being a very funny scene, but I agree with you. It's quite likely that they might change this up.
Yeah, I mean, like, to be fair to the writers of the show, it does feel like the sort of thing, people have talked about the trailer about the, in the modern era, yada yada relationships. Right. Like, so I love this scene. I like the way it is. But I can see certainly how that will be the conclusion they reach.
I understand why. I disagree, but
fair enough. I'm with you on that.
As this is going on, Birgitte walks up, and Min immediately is like, "You're Birgitte Silverbow of legend."
She's like, "No, I'm not. No."
But you can't hide from Min. Right. But Birgitte is too upset about what's going on in her head because Elaine did not inform her of what was happening.
Didn't try to mask the bond or whatever.
And so she's like, I am putting an end to this. So she's about to like barge in on them when Aviendha and Min are like, you know what? Have you considered drinking instead? So they go get some usquai. Right. And like I said, this part is, it's funny. And,
it is, yeah.
And if we get the polygamy, but, or polyamory or whatever, but we don't get this moment, to me, it's like, come on. I mean, this is kind of a funny payoff for that. And we've already talked about how, to me, it doesn't really seem like this relationship, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't make sense.
Nope. Not at all.
Please forgive me. I'm not against consenting adults doing whatever they want to do. Right. But that old Spanish proverb, he who loves one woman loves them all, but he who loves many loves none. That's... I'm with you. And which, clearly Rand agrees. That's the thing.
Yeah, he's like, this is a terrible idea.
And
I'm awful for being this way.
And while this moment is funny, it also, to me, drives home just kind of the strangeness of the idea that these three very strong women
are going to just be okay with this.
Right.
Just because the pattern thinks that they should. Pattern, who are you, dude? Jeez. This just doesn't fit with the rest of the stuff.
Yeah, and it just seems, it seems odd.
Much more the dynamic with Perrin is like, up to this point is in keeping with what is consistent with Perrin, Berelain, and Fael. That dynamic is much more, to me, satisfying in terms of the way you'd expect these characters to behave.
Right. I would be totally understanding if Rand did have individual relationships with each of these women,
and just was not telling them all about it.
Or if they even knew about it and
they just didn't want to know each other. And
sure. I mean, if but just the whole idea that they're endorsing this.
I really think he was trying to go for a empowering women type of deal here.
It just seems like
it does. I mean, it doesn't work like that for me. But
it doesn't for me either. I mean, and I don't know. I'm a guy, so who cares what I think?
That was exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, I'm the same way. I probably shouldn't have an opinion on this, or I'm not qualified to. But to me, it doesn't work that way. Although I could think that's what he was trying to do.
I always want to think the best of Jordan, but I also am kind of just I don't know, to have a guy write something where a dude ends up with 3 women who are all willing and okay with it.
How much of this was just a fantasy?
Exactly. It feels like some wish fulfillment.
It's like stuff. Ayn Rand, falling in love with some college grad student, and when she was old and in a wheelchair, and the guy was like, no. And you read her novels, and it's always those kind of empowering fantasies. She clearly was living through her fiction a little bit vicariously.
Working some stuff out, yeah.
For fans of Ayn Rand, I don't apologize.
I respect Ayn Rand's work for influence it had.
I read Atlas Shrugged in college, and I don't know, man. It just wasn't very good. The fiction wasn't very good.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, anytime you write something and the point is to make a point and not to just
when you have a dude have a radio broadcast monologue for I don't know, it was 16 pages.
Yeah,
this is not just about the plot anymore.
Well, let's move on to chapter 13. Right. Wonderful news is the name of this chapter.
Maybe that will get us some mail bag there.
Yeah, maybe that will. Tell us your views on
John Galt.
Yeah, I think we've managed to really anger people on both sides of the aisles in the last few minutes.
I would like to. I would like that. Yeah, there we go. That's true. We may have, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Chapter 13, wonderful news. I said this was a skim. We start with a Cadsuane perspective, which is fun. It's not a ton happens here. I like Cadsuane though, so I'm here for it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, she's powerful, influential lady.
Yeah, she's negotiating.
Effective.
Yes, and and it's just a fun character. When you have somebody who is, a legend and they know it, that's kind of a fun character to have. But so she's kind of negotiating with some sea folk when the wise ones come to chat with her about their agreement and regarding Rand and everything. And she likes the wise ones and kind of considers them even friends. And she's also at the same time not 100% sure she can fully trust them. The wise ones report that the last of the Aes Sedai in their custody have sworn to follow Rand.
They've bent the knee.
Yep. Cadsuane is still not sure about that. I think she doesn't really like the idea of Rand having all of these sycophants, I think.
Yeah.
I think she's just worried it'll kind of go to his head and make him harder to kind of deal with.
I don't think any Aes Sedai who has not done this is going to be thrilled at and this comes up later actually.
Right.
Be thrilled at the idea of other Aes Sedai swearing fealty to anyone, really.
Exactly, yeah. There's some talk about pillow friends among the ladies. I guess that matters. I don't know. Then they find out that one of the Ashaman has managed to heal a stilled woman completely.
Right.
Confirming the theory that a man has to heal a woman for her to
and vice versa
return to full power, just as Nynaeve's healing of Logain allowed him to return to full power,
right?
But not her healing of Swan and Lyanna. At the end of this section, Cadsuane finds out that Alanna has fallen unconscious. Her warder says she, health-wise, she feels fine in their bond, but she is afraid to wake up. And this seems to be a byproduct, of course, of her bonding Rand.
Who has bonded other people. And
right. And I'm not sure if this has to do with that, if this has to do with Rand doing what he was doing in the previous chapter.
I think it was the bond itself, right?
Yeah.
I think that comes up later. I think that was the dots are connected.
Okay. Well, and I may just have missed that, but yeah. I will say there's a little inconsistency with Alanna and her reaction to the bond, because from the get-go, when she's bonded Rand, she immediately starts having issues because of his wounds. Like, she feels them and she cannot deal with it. And it's been this way for several books. And it seems like, those effects are getting worse and everything. And really,
Elaine and Avienda
exactly
are not feeling it. Oh yeah, it's like a weirdly different bond somehow.
Now headcanon, I can very easily say, okay, Alana's bond was not consensual.
The power of love,
right?
The golden threads or whatever they talk about.
And so, I mean, you can do that, but I don't know. To me, it's just interesting because you don't have. There's no mention.
There's no explanation given for that. I'm with you.
It's just something I was thinking about on this read through, and it seems like there would at least be a mention of his ladies struggling against that pain, even if the whole point is like, hey, they're stronger willed.
They like acknowledge it. Like, how do you just live with this pain? But then they're just like,
Right, exactly. Versus Alana,
go make a sandwich.
Right. versus Alana, who's reasonably willful and powerful.
She's like rendered, like almost bedridden.
Yeah, almost useless. Anyway, we swap to a Demandred perspective. Several of the Forsaken are hanging out, talking about Rand and stuff. Demandred is frustrated because they don't know where Rand is at this moment. And Grandal says that if Rand succeeds at cleansing the taint, the Dark Lord might not trust the male Forsaken as much, since they won't have to rely on him to touch the source without going mad.
He's getting in his head.
And no one points out, but he obviously trusts the female Forsaken. Right. Fine. Yeah, but anyway, Moradin shows up and explains that Rand plans to cleanse the taint with the Chodon Call, and that's where they're like, I'm not sure if he can do that, and plus, weren't they all destroyed? And Moradin's like, nope, they were not destroyed. And he's like, all right, guys, so I got this plan. It's really crazy. It's out there, and when you feel him.
Channeling, go stop him.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just funny to me. It's like they didn't even need to be told, really.
Yeah, they're like, we're gonna stop him.
Yeah, exactly.
And he's like, yeah, you are.
Demandred's like, I don't like that Moradin's giving orders, but he's got to listen to him because he's nameless.
He's nameless.
Maybe he won't be nameless for long. And I saw a meme once where it was like basically listing off all the reasons that Demandred would have made a better nameless. And
love it.
But it's like the dark one is just saying like, yeah, I just like Moradin better.
Yeah, I mean, he just gets me.
Right. All right, chapter 14. This is a short one. What the Veil Hides. So we are introduced to a very important new character, Tuon.
Right.
Who is the daughter of the Shan-Chan Empress.
And we've been trained throughout this book to be introduced to characters and just roll our eyes like, these are not important characters.
Exactly. Yeah. And I will say he does a good job of making you pay just a little bit more attention, and then the very end, you're like, oh, okay, that's who this is.
Yeah, right.
of this chapter. So we're introduced to Tuon. She's getting her head shaved, which if you're paying attention,
you know the Shan-Chan, then man, that's really cool.
Yeah. So like the more of your head that is shaved, the higher ranking you are. So
just listening to a part where they were describing Aeginan having a bowl cut.
Right. Basically.
That's great.
Yeah. There's several times where like they describe them and it doesn't sound like good.
No.
Anyway, yeah, the idea is that because her head is completely shaved, that she's about as high-ranking a person as she could be, and as we find out, she's the daughter of the Empress. You're like, that makes sense. We also meet Selusha, who's kind of her right-hand woman, assistant, everything, and her truth speaker, Anath. There's a lot of cool texture in this chapter. It's not like super important, but it's really the first time we get to really dig into like Shan-Chan culture beyond just the Damani and Suldam dynamic, like where we really get to hear about how cutthroat
they were raised. And, especially in the royal family.
Right. And so I would say this one kind of leans toward a read because of that, just because it's a lot of interesting information, and you get to you get a picture. And of course, because you're also getting introduced to a very important character. It's funny how late in the series we meet her for how important she is.
Very true.
So the chapter ends with Tuon arriving at Abu Dar.
It's like, it's funny. It's like meeting Daenerys Targaryen, like when she makes it to Westeros. Like,
like
all this other stuff happened back there, but we don't care.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting comparison. We find out her title, and her title is, of course, Daughter of the Nine Moons. And
the bloody daughter of the bloody Nine Moons.
If you forgot, Matt was told by the Eelfin that he is destined to marry the Daughter of the Nine Moons. So now we know that Matt is going to end up with the heir to the Crystal Throne herself. So that's a big, like, whoa,
no,
kind of moment.
Tantalizing.
Yes. And it's fun every now and then. What do you call it? Dramatic irony, where the audience knows stuff that
that happens often in these books.
Yeah.
Especially because they communicate poorly. So there are oftentimes other characters know things, and they should know if they were talking to each other.
Right. But this is one that's kind of
frustrating, fun. Dramatic irony, usually.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Usually it's frustrating. This one's
kind of more, ooh.
I'm like, ooh, that's fun. So you're like, oh, wow. Okay. So Matt is going to end up with a Shan-Chan noblewoman. And which is very interesting just because of how
it's not
much
what he normally would like.
Yeah. So you're like, how does that going to work out? So anyway, and that's the end of this chapter. That's the end of this episode.
All right. Well, until next time, Tai'Shar Manetheren.